I am the CEO of HAL8, which is the labs that builds the platform called Apex.Fusion. I'm also co-founder of the project. I'm originally from Montreal, Canada, an engineer by training. I've had the privilege of working all over the world in my career. I worked a lot in Europe, based out of France, in the UK, in Denmark, in South Africa for a certain period. Most of my career was in enterprise business development and large IT projects for Fortune 500 companies. I worked for a long period of time for Computer Sciences Corporation, which is a system integrator. It's now called DXC. And I worked for Dell. I moved to the United States about 10 years ago. I live in Dallas, Texas. And yeah, it's been quite a journey. I got into the crypto space at around 2019. I got recruited to work for IOHK, the builder of Cardano. I was the chief commercial officer there for about 4 years during the last bull market. And I remember clearly when I got the call to join the team, I was very skeptical at the time about crypto because, you know, when you listen to sources, it's a scam, it's for criminals and all that kind of stuff. But I was lucky. I had my main client at the time was Fidelity, a large asset manager here in the United States, and they were already into Bitcoin, and they were mining Bitcoin and quite bullish about our industry. And when I discussed this with my previous client, they said, "Don't look back. This is the future. Go for it." And so I did that. Had a great experience with working at Cardano as chief commercial officer. And then in 2023, left IOHK and got together with some ex-colleagues that helped build Cardano, helped do the commercial side of it, try to expand into enterprise and to try to get into real world adoption use cases. And we said, hey, why don't we build our own chain? That was the genesis of it. So we got together and we kind of, we took our, let's call it our Web 2, our traditional business backgrounds, married it with all our knowledge in Web 3, and came up with an idea. So first off, we kind of took a step back and said, what's kind of the macro landscape of our industry? The first thing is that there are two main schools of thought technologically for the vast majority of the industry. One is what you call UTXO-based technology. That's what Bitcoin is based on. Cardano, Dogecoin, Dash, and a few others use UTXO. That is very, that's where my engineering mind gets kind of clicked in. That has very interesting characteristics. It is more deterministic. It's more secure. It's what you would imagine the version of digital cash. But what it has as its downside is that it's harder to program it. It's the programmability of it is more difficult. This is where Ethereum and the account-based models came in. And they have a different approach that is less deterministic, but much more amenable to programmability and scalability and developer depth and all that kind of thing. So he said, well, why don't we merge these two technologies together? And why hasn't this been done in the past? One of the big reasons it has been done is not technological, it's social. Is that in the current landscape of Web3, it's very tribal, because a blockchain is not just a technology, it's a culture, it's almost like a decentralized nation. And there's just a lot of fighting and tribalism between the different parties. And, we thought this doesn't make sense, right? Like, this is decentralized innovation. Let's put these two pieces together. And then, of course, layer on top of it a more business-oriented mindset where faster, cheaper is great, and having a lot of liquidity in terms of stable coins and the digital dollar is a good idea. Just bringing those ideas together. So that was the genesis kind of philosophy around it. Anti-tribal, let's get things working together and so forth. So we built this architecture called Apex.Fusion, and so again, engineering cap on, right? Everything has a trade-off. There's no such thing as something that solves all problems. And so our solution to what we call the trilemma, so decentralization, scalability, interoperability, is by separating the concerns, creating separate chains. So we have our prime chain, which is going on mainnet next week. The exact date, it will be announced soon. And that is a pure settlement layer. We took Cardano, which we feel is the best settlement layer in our industry. It's a proof of stake system using Ouroboros heavily researched, peer-reviewed, using functional programming, very robust, very decentralized, and we just kept it as our prime settlement layer. So that's the technology we use for prime, and then that takes care of the decentralization and the security. Then we created a second chain that's in testnet that will be released later, called Vector, and that's faster, cheaper. So what do you sacrifice for faster, cheaper? It's less decentralized. So the main chain secures the token, creates the decentralization. The faster, cheaper chain is less decentralized than the main chain. It doesn't have its own token to drive everything. It takes the token from the prime chain. So what we've created is a neutral layer 1 and a faster, cheaper layer 2 that's also UTXO. And then from an interoperability perspective, we looked at all the chains that have been in the industry, and the one that drew us the most was Polygon Edge. This is the chain that's EVM based and what all the corporates use. So the Starbucks, Disney's, all those experimentations in the previous cycle use that technology. Very robust, secure, very fast, right? And that's the EVM side. So we have these three chains. We secure it through a router bridge, which is an internal bridge that allows the tokens to flow freely through these. And that's our solution to the kind of the trilemma in our view of the things, in our view of the industry. So we're merging these two great technologies that have their pros and cons. And by merging together, you create something that's greater than the sum of its parts. So that's really what we did. We're launching Prime. It's coming out next week, date to be confirmed. And Vector Nexus on testnet, those will come out later this year. And then each layer provides its own value standalone. And then as you put layers on top of it, the value multiplies. Typical Metcalfe law, a network is the value of the square of the nodes in the network, I think is the Metcalfe's law. So that's kind of the approach that we've taken. We're very, very excited about it. We're launching in a very interesting market where meme coins have taken all the attention and all the liquidity. But frankly, there's a place for them. But utility will win out long term. And as the regulatory landscape gets clearer, more and more mega use cases will become possible. And so I think the era of utility and real world adoption and real world use cases will come back. That's our thesis.
Wavect, the Web3 software company that understands what you want.
Oh, very interesting. But what was that tipping point where you actually said, okay, nobody else is going to do that. I need to work on that. What was that thing?
So, it was the bear market. It was the tipping point, right? It was we had gone through a very, very crazy bull market at the time. And 2023 was really the depths of the bear market. And that was the trigger. It's like, okay, we have this experience of the last 4 years of the previous cycle. What worked, what didn't, what can we improve? So that was a tipping point. And these are kind of the underlying philosophies came out, is that tribalism didn't work, right? Centralized, unaccountable parties didn't work, right? Like FTX and so forth. And there's these two big tribes that are not really working together, right? And we said there's a problem here to solve. And the best time to build is in the bear market. So the trigger was the bear market. The best building happened in the bear market, ultimately. So that was the trigger.
Okay. Well, fair enough. The enterprise space always is really difficult to tap into, right? Because you're dealing with huge corporates that are usually really, really slow to adapt and change their somewhat working systems, let's put it that way. Since you are actually coming from that industry, I'm wondering, what does your strategy look like to actually get your solution adopted?
So this is kind of my piece. I did large-scale deals with Fortune 500 companies for about 25 years in the traditional IT space before coming to Web3. And as Chief Commercial Officer for Cardano, I was spending a lot of time with corporates and enterprise to get use cases to create real-world adoption. At the time, we were in the experimentation phase, where we were working with the innovation departments, trying out NFTs, trying out digital identity, trying out different things. And so here's my experience with the enterprise. there are a few hurdles we have to pass before enterprise adoption really takes place. Hurdle number one is a paradigm change. In other words, corporates are hierarchical, they're run by shareholders, they're centralized in many ways, and therefore they're really about central accumulation of power and profits. Whereas a decentralized system is the opposite of it. So there's a pragmatic aspect to that. That's top level number one. Another layer is compliance, which I would argue is probably the bigger hurdle than the cultural thing, because if you can't get a compliance system, right? So most of these corporates wanted to do private systems, closed systems. So in other words, take a blockchain, make it private. This is all the work the Hyperledger did and all these people. But then that missed the secret sauce of the blockchain, right? The secret sauce is that it's decentralized, that it's global, that it's permissionless, and so they weren't even allowed to, because their legal departments wouldn't give them compliance, wouldn't approve it, because there was no market structure in place in the United States, right? There is market structure in Switzerland. Now it's coming in Europe. There were some places where you could do these types of things, but let's be frank, the epicenter of most of the world's capital is the United States, and not only was there no regulatory clarity, there was a hostile SEC and a hostile administration against the industry. So it was a no-show for them. It was a no-go. So every corporate has experimentation in blockchain. They have their innovation departments doing it, they're working on it, but no one's deploying it at large scale because of those different topics. So for me, the way that you get in is through the innovation channel. I think you experiment with the private chains, the private centralized chains, so they know how to use the technology. They can create their closed systems, their walled gardens as they like. And I like to call that public blockchain ready, right? Once they have that, and once the regulatory clarity comes in, then they could start taking advantage of public chains. And we're seeing more and more of that. And once a market structure bill passes in the United States, which the administration is currently saying will be in 6 months, entire new industries open up. So let me just give you some examples. First off, tokenized real world assets, right? Nobody could do these in a compliant way. But once that framework comes in, you're allowed to do that, then you've got a faster, cheaper, more decentralized, global way to do things than traditionally. So you can imagine entire exchanges, real exchanges, with traditional equities on the blockchain, right? If that clarity is provided. The other big one is capital formation, right? Startups. If a startup had an option to launch a token, and instead of doing the traditional equity plays with IPO and so forth, that opens up a world of possibilities. Just ease of access to markets, 24/7 trading, all that kind of stuff. And you could do all kinds of novel things with that if you're allowed to. Like you say, okay, a token of our company when it launches will be equal to X% of revenue. So instead of having an ownership, so that means you can have an example where a company has 100% ownership of the equity, gives out tokens that gives revenue share. The big thing that's been missing from all the decentralized exchanges, right? They have these governance tokens that can't turn on the switch to share revenue because it doesn't let you do it. What if you turn that on? There's another massive market that opens up. And then you've got real estate and digital identity and all these things that can come out if the regulator allows it. And so that's the big move that's going to happen. And corporates that have been, working on blockchain in the innovation department will then be able to start graduating it into kind of testing in their kind of production systems, and then ultimately start offering blockchain related solutions to their people. And in fact, many people probably wouldn't even know it's blockchain oriented, right? One of the biggest use cases I was looking at the time, which I think is another $1 trillion industry, is loyalty points. So I did a case study on American Airlines, and at the time they had financial troubles, and so they spun out their loyalty point program so that they can borrow against that program. And we looked at numbers, and the loyalty points on American Airlines at the time was larger than the enterprise value of the company. So it's a digital asset, right? It's just centralized. It's on a SQL database somewhere. And it was larger than the enterprise value of the company. That's how powerful digital assets are. Now, what if that asset can then be tradable as a token? What if you could trade your American Airlines point for another point? Now, of course, they still want the walled garden. They want to use it for American Airlines. But what if you say, okay, listen, you can use it for, but with a 20 or 30% discount, in other words, 80% of the value, you could take it out and use it on the public blockchain. You could buy Ethereum with it. You could use DeFi with it. You can trade it for another loyalty point. Then that creates a whole bunch of new use cases. Again, the user may not even have to know what's happening in the background, but these are the, like, there's so many of these cases, we could spend the whole day discussing them, of use cases of this type. Like, what about your data? That's being monetized by large corporations like Facebook and so forth. What if you owned your own data and they paid you directly for your data, and you could switch it on or off, right? There's just case by case by case by case, which are not possible because there's no framework in place, and there's too many actors at the governmental level that are hostile against it because they're worried about the risk to their currencies, right? Like Bitcoin versus the US dollar and all this kind of thing. Whereas in fact, if done properly, if you embrace it, everything can work symbiotically. That's my point of view.
You mentioned now data privacy a couple of times, compliance, and so on and so forth. When working with enterprise, in my experience, that's usually one of the first things they also come up with. Like, what about our data? Like, when you have a public blockchain, oftentimes when we look at these enterprise blockchain solutions, they're either hybrid chains or you have Hedera and all these other things. I'm curious, like, how do you deal with that specific requirement?
So that's an excellent question. I mean, chains are public, but they're cryptographically secure. So you can have private data on a blockchain. This is possible. And you're absolutely right. I know in Austria and Germany, back in the day working with large corporates in Europe, very, very strict with data privacy, right? They're very strict with GDPR and all this kind of thing. And it's very difficult to prove that it's GDPR compliant. And there's no real framework to kind of prove it and all this kind of thing. So it's possible, and there's a lot of privacy chains out there that are coming out that are tackling the problem specifically. One I had looked that it was a secret network, which is on Cosmos, right? So they have their privacy is actually on the hardware level with secure enclaves and so forth. So private data is very possible because all you see on the blockchain is the hashed version of it. You don't actually get access to the data, right? So privacy is possible on the blockchain. There are chains that are working on this. And so that is a very solvable problem, but you need the market to demand it. If there's no market that demands this, then these solutions won't be deployed or gain traction. If that makes sense.
I mean, hash, of course, like a hash, you shouldn't be able to retrieve the data from, right? But when it's encrypted, you basically have a key of some kind, your private key, if you use asymmetric encryption. And if that is being leaked, like your wallet, your data is public, basically, right? And the crazy thing about GDPR, it's just, I know you're not in Europe, right? But the crazy, yeah. the crazy thing actually is that even a hash, and that, I can't wrap my head around that. Even a hash is personal data according to the GDPR law. So that's kind of, yes, there are a lot of solutions out there, but I don't think it's that easy, to be fair, right? Because you're not allowed to even save the data and you have to delete it.
You nailed it, right? That's the second hurdle, is that the regulation needs to change to adapt to the technology. It's a two-way street at the end of the day. It's the technology needs to try to comply to regulation, but in certain circumstances, blockchains cannot, by their very nature, comply because it's immutable. You can't take it away, right? unless you put in a smart contract and put it against. So there's ways technologically to solve it, but then the regulation needs to also bend to a new reality of blockchain systems, which actually give greater privacy to the person than traditional systems, because every traditional system has been hacked. The amount of times there's alerts on your iPhone about, this has been hacked, that's been hacked. All my data is out there. So how secure is the current system, right? It's not secure at all. It's horrible. So they claim it's secure. It's more about control. It's not about security. I'm sorry. That's the reality of it. Then you got this whole KYC AML stuff, which is very well purposed, right? You should know your customer. You should avoid money laundering and anti-terrorism, all the rest of that stuff. But does it really stop money laundering? Does it really stop terrorism? No. In fact, terrorists avoid the blockchain. They tell you not to use the blockchain. Traditional systems are far easier to hack, far easier to circumvent, and it doesn't work. And then you've got tons of data that gets leaked. The amount of times I have to show my passport, give my personal data to do anything, open up a bank, get insurance, get this, get my driver's license, all the rest of that stuff. Every time that happens, that's a vector for my data to get stolen. And guess what? It gets stolen a lot. A lot. I don't know anybody who hasn't had their data stolen in some fashion or their accounts hacked. Not a single person. So the current system doesn't work. You have a regulatory framework that says you should do this. A bunch of IT systems that try to do it, and it fails miserably. So I'm sorry, that needs to change. And I think blockchain is part of that solution. So status quo is not working. It's just not working.
What do you think about zero knowledge?
Zero knowledge is very interesting, right? And again, it's technology waiting in the wings to be used, right? So zero knowledge is a very interesting use case, right? So the simplest one is your identification, right? Your digital ID. So I don't think you can get away from having a centralized authority issue it. I think a centralized authority will always be there to issue your birth certificate, your citizenship, your driver's license. But then, do I have to show that every single time? Like, if I'm under 21 in the U.S. or 18 or 16, depending on the country that you're in, and I go to a bar to drink, right? Do they need to see where I live? What color my eyes are? My picture, my personal data. Do they need to see all of that so I can go in, or can I just have the phone with a QR code, over 18, yes or no, green, red? In other words, you don't even need to know what age I am. Right? That is what zero knowledge provides, right? And it's provably secure. So I think zero knowledge has massive use cases, but it's up against incumbency. It's going up against large companies that do this. And plus, there's agencies that want access to your data, frankly, right? They don't like people having 100% control over the data as well. So you're up against this incumbency that's probably working against it, and you have a technological solution to it. That's not the problem. The problem is regulatory, political, and all the rest of that. So zero knowledge is very powerful, and has a future if it's allowed to use.
Is that something you would do? You think that zero knowledge will or is playing a part in Apex.Fusion?
Currently, we do have it in one spot. So we did not. So we had a choice on the Nexus chain about using a ZK version of it versus Nexus. We chose Pragmatic to start with, but we did build a reputation system. So one things we did kind of separate from our chains is a reputation system to encourage participation in network and so forth, and that has ZK technology and AI associated with it, so that you don't have to give your wallet address or if it's not visible and so forth. So that's the one spot that we kind of injected ZK, is in the identification side. ZK on the chain level will have its day, but it's not here yet. So we took a pragmatic, business-oriented approach where we did not choose the ZK tech. But it's very interesting. We're going to keep watching it, and privacy solutions that come out. Look at the ZK solutions come out. But if there's no use cases for it, then it's just going to be an innovation chain that doesn't have any adoption. So we're keeping an eye on it, and we'll get there when the industry gets. Same thing with decentralized governance, right? That's another interesting area of innovation, the DAOs and so forth. but it hasn't been solved because you can't, you kind of import on chain the politics that you get off chain, right? You still need experts. You still need, there's still people that'll gauge this thing. There is kind of, um, what's it called, oligopoly, like
Hmm.
oligarchic, like people who have the most tokens kind of vote and kind of push everyone out and so forth. So that hasn't been solved. So again, we took some pragmatic solutions. We did not go for decentralized governance. We set up a foundation. So the labs is based in Abu Dhabi, the
Hmm.
technology arm, and the foundation's in Switzerland. So what we did in Switzerland is we created a 7-person council, so quite broad. So that centralization comes with humans, not with on-chain, DAO structures. And then in the constitution of the foundation, we were very clear about its mandate, right? That it needs to support the community, it needs to kind of do A, B, and C. Frankly, current governance, that's a better option. Again, we're going to keep looking at the decentralized governance world, see how it evolves. And if somebody kind of cracks the code and makes something that's fair, but also useful and quick, you can go to that as well. So there's a few technologies out there that have phenomenal futures, but are just not ready yet. They're not baked enough. And then you got the whole thing with decentralized countries and decentralized communities, right? And a whole bunch of other interesting use cases that come out, but they're not there yet, right? And we'll keep monitoring the market, and as things progress, we'll start looking at those things. Now, it's not only us, right? We're a decentralized platform. Anybody can build whatever they want on the platform. So if somebody wants to experiment on those things, great. It just, we as the founding, taking that bet yet, is the way I would look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I would consider that the only path moving forward, right? Technology is a tool, not a solution by itself.
Exactly.
And you definitely have to meet enterprise or your customers or your user base where they are. You can't just alienate them again with all that blockchain stuff because you will never get them onto your platform if you do so. So
Exactly.
that's definitely the way. Um, well, one thing whenever like we have 2025, right? So we already have a couple of enterprise solutions out there, not just since the last year, but also for a couple of years. Some were are failing completely, some were moderately successful, and some are just, let's say, flowing around. And I'm curious, how does Apex Fusion differ, but more in regards of why do you think it will work with your approach?
So if we're to step back, let's discuss a little bit which ones have found product market fit, right? What part of blockchain has found product market fit? Speculation and gambling, number one, right? Poly market, betting markets, and meme coins where you could just bet and play a casino 24/7. That's the reputation of our industry, frankly, is that speculation and gambling, right? Okay, that is something. It's not nothing, but that's not gonna get the global adoption, right? Um, Bitcoin as a store of value has found its product market fit with the ETFs, all these things. These are massive corporations that are betting on Bitcoin. Now it's going to nation states that are going to invest in Bitcoin as a store as a replacement for digital gold. That is a massive product market fit to the tune of $2 trillion, right? So that by itself is massive. Then you've got stablecoins, massive product market fit. Access to digital dollars, digital euros, digital pounds in places that have currencies that are failing, or they want to protect some of their wealth and bring it over, and they don't want to they don't really care about store of value for Bitcoin. They just want to buy groceries, right? They want to just do day-to-day stuff and transact between businesses. Stablecoin is another massive a true product market fit, right? So what are we doing? First off is we're merging the technologies. So we're giving more tools to the toolkit, as you're saying. So in some cases, digital cash is more relevant. In other cases, digital accounts are more relevant. So we're adding a new layer of interoperability, which I think is useful. But also, we have a mindset that this is the market that we're approaching. So it's really the philosophy of the team and the dedication of the team to go after these use cases. with people that have been there, done that, right? So let me give you an analogy just to illustrate the point. Like after we've launched our platforms are robust and we're kind of at the first stage, the next big stage is distribution, right? I think we can argue back in the 80s that Apple was a better product. The Macintosh was a better product. But Windows won. Why did they win? Because they were more widely distributed. How did they get more widely distributed? Because you had a CEO that had a vision about distribution, sales, and all that kind of stuff. Boots on the ground, sales, being in the enterprises, being at the governments, talking to them. That's what's going to change the difference, right? If we're technology that they need to use, we'll add it, right? So that's the Salesforce part of the puzzle, in my view. That makes a difference. Technologies, a lot of them are interchangeable, but you can't interchange a workforce that knows how to do enterprise, that have done it, been there, done that. Our team is the power. We have a mix of Web3 natives, but a lot of traditional business people from the Web2 world. So that's kind of the secret sauce as I see it for enterprise adoption, government adoption, and so forth. And not being, idealistic, not being religious about it. Like if a company wants a private network, take a private network. Use our technology privately. It's not going to add any value to the token, right? But it gets our technology adopted, and we're here for the long term, and we'll wait for it to take fruition. And at one point, hey, you can connect it here, right? These are the types of pragmatic approaches that will win that game. But for now, there aren't that many mass adoption use cases, except for the ones that I mentioned, which are actually mass adoption. So if you're let's break down the industry. You got $2 trillion digital gold. You got, what is it? $200 billion digital dollars?
No
Something
idea.
like that.
No idea.
Something like that. USDT, USDC, all the other
Oh,
stablecoins.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
USDT is at 250 billion, but please,
It's in the hundreds of billions in any case.
yeah,
Right? So you got a 2 trillion digital gold, a few $100 billion of digital dollars, and then you got like Ethereum and the other platforms, which are the innovation platforms, at a few $100 billion. That sounds like an interesting industry to me, right? And then out of that innovation engines, of which we're a part of, then new industries will spawn out, and then the next big product market fit will come out. And which one is it? I don't know. Is it gaming? Is it AI? Is it tokenized real assets? Is it digital ID? Go down the list, right? Which one of those are going to catch fire next? Your guess is as good as mine. But we've created an ecosystem that's experimenting, just like the startup ecosystem did in Silicon Valley. And then at one point, it's going to become obvious. Oh, of course it's this one. Of course it's tokenized equities next, because BlackRock and Citadel are opening up an exchange in Dallas, and they're going to use blockchain. Well, of course this is what it is, right? It's always easier to look backwards than to look forward. Right? And then all of a sudden, you're going to get this next massive use case that takes shape, and then so on and so forth. That's the way that I see things. So if you're in it for the long term, there's going to be lots of opportunity.
So just to recap from my understanding, you bet on distribution, right? On sales, on actually like that old-fashioned.
People, humans talking to humans in
Love
real
it.
life.
Cool. Yeah, I mean that's what enterprise wants in the end, right? At least from my knowledge.
Yeah.
So yeah, cool stuff. I mean, something I'm always really curious about when people talk from their enterprise journey, right? Enterprise is now basically, you're now working in like you founded your own startup, basically, right? No matter how big it is. What made you take that jump personally? Like what? But because you obviously, as you mentioned in the first question, there are different reasons why you think this should exist, but why did you decide for you as a person, I wanna do that? And any answer, of course, is like, I don't judge, right? I'm just curious if you wanna share.
Yeah, of course. No, that's a great question. So, first of all, my father was an entrepreneur, so he had his own businesses his whole life. I went down the more traditional, get educated academics. I almost did my PhD. That I worked for large corporations, etc. And then I got my first taste of startup life working for IOHK in Cardano world. And, you know, I never want to go back, right? Like I got the bug, basically. And Peter Thiel said it best. He said, in the current world where AI is, things are changing so fast, things are transforming so fast, that the actual risk is not taking risk. In fact, staying in a corporation is a far more dangerous thing now than working for startups, because all these corporations are going to get disrupted and they're going to disappear sooner or later. AI is going to disrupt all the jobs, or, you know, if you're not at the bleeding edge in front of this stuff, you're going to get steamrolled by it. So, I mean, there's also a financial aspect. You know, I'm not a young startup guy. You know, I'm an older gentleman, if I may say so. So I also had some financial freedom that allowed me to do it. That's also part of it. But I also feel that it's more dangerous now to stay in a corporation. What happens if you stay in a corporation, you know, for another 20 years? And it gets disrupted in 5 years. And all the skills that you learned for that corporation are useless in 5 years. What do? So for me, the risk in today's society is not taking a risk. That's riskier. It's weird to say it, but it's true if you think about it.
Yeah. I mean, I would even say it's quite common knowledge by now, right? At least I have heard it. Like, I'm in the startup world, right? So I obviously have heard it like 100 times, but I think it's just so obvious now, right? It's
Think of the geopolitical side of it. Which are the most powerful nations now? The ones that have vibrant startup cultures and startup ecosystems. The big corporations were startups 10 years ago, right? Europe is falling behind, unfortunately, right? A lot of talent that moved there moved out because it just doesn't have the culture, and it's not going in the right direction from a startup innovation engine standpoint, and it's having geopolitical circumstances. So at an individual level, it's smarter to be in a startup. At a nation state level, if not encouraging startup culture, you're actually falling behind geopolitically, economically. You know, look what's happening in Germany and France and the UK. You know, it's sad. It's sad to see it. Now there's some green sprouts. I think France has been pretty good on the AI front, but Germany right now is just in a horrible state. It's just like all the advantages of Germany have just fallen apart, right? Like, I was speaking to a German colleague and he was telling me that the 3 pillars of Germany have just fallen, right? Cheap energy from Russia, gone. Protection of the United States, wavering. And what was the third one?
Cars?
Innovation and manufacturing. China is beating Germany. So what are they going to do? If they don't switch to startup mentality and transform, it's going to be left behind, right? And the same goes for all the big powers in the EU. So listen, I had the journey. I started in Canada, had a great life, went to France, worked in the UK. And then when I moved to the United States, it's the stark difference about the startup mentality, the innovation engines, all this kind of stuff. It's very stark, and it's going to drain the brains and the capital away from the countries that don't embrace it.
I love that. Also, not the situation, but what you shared.
Oh, listen, don't underestimate the EU, right? There's still a lot of smart people, you know, great cultures, you know, that can do it if the governments allow them to do it. So there needs to be some kind of first recognition and then change. And then I think it's got the gray matter required to do it, in my view.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm of Greek origin, so, you know, I have a European ancestry, so I'm rooting for Europe to kind of get its act straight.
I appreciate it. Speaking for all Europeans. I mean, this all sounded like a big key takeaway, but do you have maybe one for, let's say, you're a young European founder, or a young founder in general, doesn't need to be a European, in the US, in China, wherever, if they can watch it, what would you tell them?
Go where the action is. So if you want to innovate in a technology, go where the innovation is happening. The beautiful thing about Web3, location is less important. So Web3 offers that interesting aspect where it doesn't really matter where you are. So if you're in Web3, you're probably looking for the most nimble digital nomad place to go. If you're looking to do a startup in technology A or technology B, go where all the innovation is happening, because the ecosystem is what drives things. Like being around other people that are, ambitious, knowledgeable, is a huge advantage. So, where is the AI center? Silicon Valley. So go to Silicon Valley, or in China, wherever DeepSeek and all these things are happening, go there. Right? Location is still important from an innovation standpoint. Web3 breaks that to a certain extent. So there's a new world where location no longer matters. But I still think location matters, broadly speaking.
Yeah, it's your environment, right?
Yeah.
Funny enough, when I did my
other founders, can you meet up with other founders? Are they near you? Now you can do a Zoom, which is, again, there's a whole bunch of other technologies that enable this now, but it still matters to be places where innovation is happening.
Yeah, I mean, you watch them, right? You hear them speak, you learn from them, right? And there's also peer pressure too, but especially if you're younger.
Positive peer pressure, yeah.
So, absolutely. No, cool. Hey, Jerry, is there anything else you would love to share? Any call to action, like how people can check out Apex.Fusion?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, in classical style, X, Twitter, start at Apex.Fusion is our handle. Go to our website, www.apexfusion.org, and it gets you started. On X, there's also Telegram, but it all links out from there. If you go to the website or Twitter, it'll link you to the right places to get started. Right now, the action is validators. We're launching our Prime network, which is the settlement layer. So we're looking for people to become what we call stake pool operators or validators. We started that program like 6 weeks ago. We wanted 70. We're at 160. So it's oversubscribed right now. But when we launch, it's 100% decentralized. Anybody could do it. So that's kind of our first stage. And then once you understand our roadmap, you'll see new use cases coming out. The other one is our reputation system. We have a Telegram mini app where you can start learning, educating yourself about our system, get points that eventually will be rewarded for. So I would say the initial cohort is validators and people want to learn about us and get started. And then they can go on our test net for Vector and Nexus, and then ultimately launch with those platforms in the future. So that's kind of my call to action. Otherwise, I'd love to hear any other questions from you about Apex.Fusion, if there's anything you're interested in hearing about.
I mean, me personally or the audience? I ask a lot of my questions.
Either or.
Well, speaking to the audience now, if you got any questions, drop them below. I'm happy to forward them to Jerry or tag him, like depending on the network we are on. And yeah, with that being said, Jerry, it was really a pleasure talking with you.
Well, thank you.
And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Wavect, the web-free software company that understands what you want.